the fastest way to lose the truth is to believe you already know it. Morning sunlight reflected across the glass towers and stone facades of downtown Washington, District of Columbia, where government employees, attorneys, and visitors filled the sidewalks with the familiar rhythm of another workday. Coffee shops welcomed long lines of customers. Traffic flowed steadily through the broad avenues, and the quiet confidence of the nation's capital settled over the city like clockwork. Outside an unmarked federal office building, a well-dressed black man stepped through the revolving doors carrying a slim leather briefcase and a sealed document envelope. He wore a charcoal gray suit, polished shoes, and the calm expression of someone accustomed to responsibility without seeking attention. He paused near the curb, glanced briefly at his watch, and appeared to be waiting for transportation that was scheduled to arrive within minutes. Few people gave him a second look. That anonymity was intentional. His work often required blending into ordinary surroundings, allowing professionalism rather than recognition to define every assignment. Several yards away, Officer Ryan Collins continued his morning patrol. After nearly a decade in uniform, he trusted his instincts and believed experience had taught him how to recognize situations requiring closer attention. As he scanned the busy intersection, the man standing quietly outside the federal building caught his attention. Nothing appeared obviously unlawful, yet Ryan convinced himself that something did not seem quite right. He adjusted the radio on his shoulder before walking confidently across the sidewalk toward the waiting stranger. "Good morning, sir," Ryan said in a firm but controlled voice. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The man turned immediately, offering a courteous smile that revealed neither surprise nor irritation. "Of course, officer," he replied calmly. "How may I assist you today?" Ryan asked where he had come from, whether he worked inside the building, and why he was carrying official-looking documents. Every question received a respectful answer. The man explained that he had just completed an early meeting and was waiting for a scheduled pickup before continuing to another appointment. His voice remained measured, his posture relaxed, and his attention never drifted from the conversation. Even so, Ryan continued pressing for additional details. Nearby pedestrians gradually slowed their pace, sensing that an ordinary conversation had become unusually serious. A tourist family paused beside a street map, while office workers quietly exchanged curious glances before continuing toward nearby buildings. The man never raised his voice. Instead, he responded with remarkable patience. "Officer," he said gently, "I understand the importance of public safety. I only ask that every decision today be guided by facts rather than assumptions." Ryan acknowledged the statement but remained unconvinced. His concern deepened even though nothing before him suggested immediate danger. As the conversation continued, his posture became noticeably more guarded, prompting the man to remain exactly where he stood with both hands visible and every movement slow and deliberate. Across the street, a dark sport utility vehicle eased quietly into a legal parking space without drawing unnecessary attention. Two professionally dressed individuals remained inside, watching the scene through the windshield without stepping out. They exchanged a brief glance before one of them spoke softly into a concealed communication device. Neither showed urgency. Neither attempted to interrupt. They simply observed with disciplined patience, as though they understood that timing mattered as much as action. The man standing before Officer Collins noticed the vehicle only for an instant before returning his attention to the officer. He offered one final calm observation that seemed almost out of place because of how quietly it was delivered. "Every public servant carries great responsibility," he said. "Sometimes the next decision becomes the one remembered for an entire career." Ryan met his eyes with unwavering confidence, unaware that the ordinary-looking stranger had spent years protecting the law from the shadows, and that within only a few more moments the true purpose of that quiet morning meeting would begin to reveal itself. Officer Ryan Collins studied the man standing before him with growing certainty that extending the conversation was the responsible choice, even though every answer he received remained calm, complete, and respectful. The busy sidewalk continued flowing around them as government employees hurried toward nearby offices. Attorneys crossed the street carrying briefcases, and tourists paused to admire the historic architecture that surrounded the federal district. Yet inside the invisible circle created by the conversation, time seemed to slow. The well-dressed black man never appeared impatient. He simply adjusted his grip on the leather briefcase and maintained steady eye contact without displaying the slightest hint of hostility. "May I ask for additional identification?" Ryan said. The man nodded politely. "Certainly, officer. Before I reach into my jacket, I would like you to know exactly what I am doing." Ryan appreciated the statement and gave a brief nod. Every movement that followed was slow, deliberate, and completely transparent. The man carefully removed a standard government identification holder, keeping it visible without suddenly extending it toward the officer. Ryan examined the exterior but did not immediately recognize the credential because it remained partially closed. "Would you mind opening it?" he asked. "Of course," the man replied. Before doing so, however, he paused for only a moment. "Officer, may I ask one question?" Ryan answered cautiously. "Go ahead." The man spoke with remarkable composure. "Have I done anything today that gives you objective reason to believe I have committed a crime?" The question lingered between them. Ryan considered it carefully before responding. "I am conducting an investigation based on the circumstances I observed." The man acknowledged the answer with a respectful nod rather than an argument. "I understand your responsibility," he replied. "I simply believe every investigation becomes stronger when it begins with observable facts instead of assumptions." Those words caused Ryan to hesitate for the first time since approaching him. Across the avenue, the dark sport utility vehicle remained quietly parked. Inside, two professionally dressed individuals continued watching through lightly tinted glass. One briefly glanced toward a digital tablet displaying what appeared to be a schedule before returning attention to the sidewalk. Neither person showed alarm. Their calm suggested preparation rather than uncertainty. Back on the sidewalk, several pedestrians had discreetly slowed their pace. Some looked on with curiosity, while others continued walking after realizing the conversation remained peaceful. A nearby security officer standing outside another federal building observed from a distance without intervening, recognizing that no immediate danger existed. Ryan requested the man's full name. "Marcus Reed," came the calm reply. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," Ryan said while writing the information into his notebook. "Do you work for the federal government?" Marcus smiled slightly without revealing very much. "I serve the public in a professional capacity." The answer sounded truthful, yet carefully measured. Ryan frowned gently. "That is not very specific." Marcus answered just as evenly. "Some positions require discretion until circumstances make additional information appropriate." Ryan remained unconvinced. His instincts continued telling him that something about the encounter required closer attention, even though every observable fact pointed toward cooperation rather than resistance. Marcus remained exactly where he stood, hands relaxed and visible, making no attempt to leave despite having every opportunity to end the conversation. The morning breeze carried the distant sound of church bells across the city as another unmarked vehicle quietly entered the block and parked several spaces behind the first. Ryan noticed it only briefly before returning his attention to Marcus, unaware that multiple federal professionals were already monitoring the situation with disciplined patience, waiting to see whether the next decision would resolve the encounter peacefully or transform an ordinary morning into an unforgettable lesson about judgment, authority, and the quiet weight carried by every choice made in public service. Marcus Reed remained exactly where he was, showing no sign of frustration despite the growing attention surrounding the encounter. The morning air carried the distant sound of traffic as Washington, District of Columbia, continued its routine, unaware that a quiet lesson about judgment was unfolding in plain sight. Officer Ryan Collins looked once more at the identification holder still resting calmly in Marcus's hand. It appeared official, yet Ryan hesitated before asking to examine it more closely. "Please hand it to me slowly," he said. Marcus acknowledged the request with a respectful nod. "Certainly, officer." Every movement remained deliberate and transparent. He extended the credential carefully without stepping forward, allowing Ryan to receive it comfortably. Ryan opened the identification and immediately recognized that it belonged to a federal agency, but the details visible before him did not completely answer the questions forming in his mind. The document confirmed government service, yet portions of the credential were intentionally limited because of the sensitive nature of the position. Ryan studied it for several seconds before looking back at Marcus. "Can you explain exactly what your assignment is today?" Marcus answered with the same calm voice that had never changed since the conversation began. I am performing official duties that cannot be discussed in a public setting. Ryan frowned slightly. That is not enough information for me. Marcus replied gently. I understand your concern, but there are legal limits regarding what I am authorized to disclose outside secure channels. The answer only deepened Ryan's determination to continue the encounter. Around them, more pedestrians quietly noticed the unusual conversation. Some slowed their pace while pretending to check messages on their phones. Others simply glanced over their shoulders before continuing toward nearby government offices. No one appeared alarmed because both men remained composed, yet everyone sensed the unusual seriousness of the exchange. Across the street, the first dark sport utility vehicle remained parked. Inside, one professionally dressed observer quietly spoke into a concealed communication device, while another monitored the sidewalk without showing visible concern. A second unmarked vehicle had also arrived several minutes earlier, its occupants remaining inside, as though following an established protocol. Marcus noticed neither vehicle again. His complete attention remained focused on Ryan. Officer, he said respectfully, I want this conversation to conclude professionally for both of us. Ryan crossed his arms briefly before returning the credential. Then help me understand why multiple unmarked vehicles seem interested in this block. For the first time, Marcus allowed a faint smile to appear. It was not a smile of superiority or satisfaction. It reflected quiet understanding. Sometimes, he answered carefully, the full picture becomes clear only after every piece is in place. Ryan followed Marcus's brief glance toward the opposite side of the avenue. At that exact moment, one of the individuals inside the nearest vehicle opened the passenger door and stepped onto the sidewalk. Dressed in a dark business suit with an earpiece barely visible beneath neatly trimmed hair, the individual did not hurry. Another suited professional exited the second vehicle moments later. Neither person displayed urgency. Neither approached aggressively. Instead, both walked with measured confidence toward the federal building while maintaining careful awareness of everything around them. Ryan instinctively straightened his posture, realizing the situation might involve responsibilities far beyond an ordinary street encounter. Marcus remained completely still, his expression unchanged. The growing silence seemed louder than the traffic surrounding them, as every step taken by the approaching professionals suggested that the ordinary morning was about to reveal an extraordinary truth, one capable of changing how everyone standing on that sidewalk understood authority, responsibility, and the quiet power of patience. The two professionally dressed individuals continued walking toward the conversation with calm, deliberate confidence, never raising their voices or drawing unnecessary attention from the growing crowd. Officer Ryan Collins instinctively shifted his stance, his training telling him that whoever these people were, they carried themselves with unusual discipline. Marcus Reed remained exactly where he had been since the beginning of the encounter, neither attempting to leave nor signaling the approaching individuals. His composure had never changed. The first man stopped several feet away and offered Ryan a courteous nod before speaking. Good morning, officer. My name is David Sullivan. He briefly displayed an official federal credential before returning it to his jacket. We appreciate the work you are doing today. Ryan acknowledged the identification with a professional nod. Good morning. May I ask why you are here? David answered without hesitation. We are monitoring an official federal assignment currently taking place in this area. Ryan glanced briefly toward Marcus before returning his attention to David. Does that assignment involve this gentleman? David exchanged a quick look with Marcus, who responded with only the slightest nod. Yes, David answered. It does. Ryan remained calm, but the realization that the encounter extended beyond an ordinary street contact began changing the way he viewed the situation. Can you explain his role? He asked. David smiled politely. I can, but only after confirming that doing so will not interfere with the assignment. The second suited professional quietly stepped beside David, remaining observant without interrupting the conversation. Neither individual displayed authority through intimidation. Their confidence came entirely from experience and procedure. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice as measured as it had been from the first moment they met. Officer Collins, I appreciate that you have remained professional throughout this conversation. I also understand that every officer has a responsibility to ask questions when circumstances appear unusual. My responsibility, however, requires protecting certain information until disclosure is appropriate. Ryan looked from Marcus to the two federal representatives, recognizing that every person standing before him seemed remarkably calm despite the attention surrounding them. Nearby pedestrians continued watching from a respectful distance, sensing that something significant was unfolding even though no one was raising a voice. The breeze carried the sound of distant traffic through the broad avenue, while sunlight reflected across the stone walls of the nearby federal buildings. David reached into his inside jacket pocket once more and removed a second identification wallet. This time he opened it completely before holding it where Ryan could clearly examine every detail. "Officer Collins," he said respectfully, "I would like to formally identify Special Agent Marcus Reed of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words settled over the sidewalk in complete silence. Ryan carefully examined the credential before lifting his eyes toward Marcus once again. The ordinary-looking man he had questioned throughout the morning had never exaggerated his position, never argued, and never attempted to use his authority to end the conversation. Instead, he had relied entirely upon patience and professionalism. David continued speaking in the same calm tone. "Special Agent Reed is conducting an authorized federal operation. Certain operational details remain protected, but his identity and assignment have now been appropriately confirmed." Ryan slowly handed the credential back, realizing that every answer Marcus had given since the beginning had been truthful within the legal limits of his responsibilities. Marcus accepted the identification with a courteous nod before quietly saying, "Titles matter less than judgment, officer. Every encounter gives us an opportunity to strengthen public trust." Ryan stood thoughtfully, recognizing that what had begun as an ordinary patrol stop had become a lesson he would remember for the rest of his career, while the true consequences of that morning had only just begun to unfold. The atmosphere on the sidewalk changed almost immediately, not because anyone raised a voice, but because the truth quietly replaced uncertainty. Officer Ryan Collins looked from the Federal Bureau of Investigation credential back to Marcus Reed, replaying every moment of the encounter in his mind. Marcus had answered every question honestly within the legal limits of his assignment. He had never argued, never attempted to walk away, and never relied upon his position to gain an advantage. The realization settled heavily upon Ryan because he understood that professionalism was measured not only by enforcing the law, but also by recognizing when judgment deserved another careful look. David Sullivan accepted the credential back from Marcus before addressing Ryan with the same calm respect that had characterized every federal representative involved. "Officer Collins, we appreciate your willingness to communicate professionally throughout this encounter. Situations involving sensitive federal operations require careful coordination, and our shared goal is always public safety." Ryan nodded slowly. "I understand." His voice carried none of the certainty that had defined the beginning of the conversation. Instead, it reflected thoughtful reflection. Marcus offered a reassuring smile. "Officer, difficult moments do not always define a career. Sometimes they become the beginning of better decisions." Nearby pedestrians gradually resumed their routines after realizing the situation had concluded peacefully. The curious silence dissolved into the familiar sounds of Washington, District of Columbia, as office workers returned to their buildings and visitors continued exploring the city. The federal vehicles remained parked only long enough for David to exchange several quiet words with Marcus regarding the schedule for the remainder of the day. Every movement reflected discipline rather than urgency. Before leaving, David turned back toward Ryan. "There will be routine coordination between our agencies concerning today's contact," he explained. "That is standard procedure whenever an active federal assignment intersects with local law enforcement. The purpose is documentation, not conflict." Ryan appreciated the clarification. He understood that reports, body camera recordings, dispatch logs, and witness observations would naturally become part of the administrative review. Nothing about the process surprised him. Accountability was an expected part of every professional agency. Marcus closed his leather briefcase after confirming that every document remained secure. "Thank you for remaining respectful," he said sincerely. Public confidence grows strongest when professionals continue communicating, even during misunderstandings. Ryan looked directly at him. If my assumptions caused unnecessary difficulty, I regret that. Marcus acknowledged the statement with a quiet nod rather than a lecture. Every profession asks us to improve. Mine is no different. The words lingered long after they were spoken. David glanced toward the waiting sport utility vehicle before checking the time. We should continue, he said softly. Marcus agreed and prepared to leave, but before walking away, he paused one final time. Officer Collins, he said, authority earns lasting respect only when it is guided by fairness before conclusions. Ryan watched as Marcus joined the federal team and entered the waiting vehicle. The convoy departed without lights, sirens, or spectacle, disappearing into the steady flow of downtown traffic within seconds. Left standing on the sidewalk, Ryan remained thoughtful instead of defensive. He realized the morning had not ended with embarrassment or confrontation. It had ended with an opportunity. Later that afternoon, his supervisor would receive the routine documentation generated by the encounter, and an ordinary review process would begin. For Ryan, however, the most important report would not be written on paper. It had already begun taking shape in his own mind, reminding him that the strongest public servants were not those who refused to question themselves, but those willing to learn whenever the truth revealed a better path forward. Several weeks passed, and the administrative review that followed the encounter proceeded exactly as both local law enforcement and federal agencies expected. Reports were compared carefully, body camera recordings were reviewed alongside dispatch logs, and every statement was evaluated according to established procedures rather than public opinion. The process remained professional from beginning to end because every agency involved understood that accountability strengthened cooperation instead of weakening it. Officer Ryan Collins attended each meeting with complete honesty, answering every question directly and accepting constructive feedback without attempting to justify every decision he had made that morning. His supervising lieutenant later met with him privately inside the precinct conference room. The atmosphere was serious but respectful. Experience gives us confidence, the lieutenant said quietly. Good judgment comes from knowing when confidence should pause long enough to examine every fact. Ryan listened without interruption. Looking back, he realized that Marcus Reed had repeatedly encouraged him to focus on observable evidence rather than assumptions. Those words carried far greater meaning now than they had on the sidewalk outside the federal building. The review concluded with recommendations for additional professional development emphasizing constitutional policing, communication during voluntary public contacts, and decision-making under uncertain circumstances. Ryan accepted every recommendation without hesitation because he understood that improvement was not a punishment. It was part of the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. Across the city, Special Agent Marcus Reed continued his federal assignment exactly as scheduled. The encounter had delayed him only briefly, and he never requested special treatment or additional recognition because of what had happened. During an internal debriefing, one colleague asked whether the situation had changed his opinion of local law enforcement. Marcus answered thoughtfully. One difficult encounter should never define an entire profession, he said. The measure of professionalism is how people respond after they recognize an opportunity to improve. His supervisor nodded in agreement, reminding the team that successful partnerships between federal and local agencies depended upon mutual respect long before any investigation began. Meanwhile, David Sullivan completed the final coordination report, documenting that the assignment had remained secure throughout the encounter and that every participant ultimately acted within established procedures once identities had been properly confirmed. The report emphasized communication, cooperation, and the value of resolving misunderstandings without unnecessary escalation. Months later, Ryan voluntarily enrolled in advanced training focused on procedural fairness and community engagement. During classroom discussions, he often reflected on the importance of introducing himself clearly, explaining the purpose of every encounter, and allowing observable facts to guide each decision. Fellow officers noticed that his approach gradually became more patient, more deliberate, and more attentive to the perspectives of the people he served. One afternoon, while speaking with a new recruit after a training exercise, Ryan offered a lesson he wished he had fully understood years earlier. Authority should never replace curiosity, he said. When we stop asking careful questions and start relying only on assumptions, we risk overlooking the truth standing directly in front of us. At that very moment, Marcus Reed concluded another successful federal briefing several miles away, continuing the quiet work that most citizens would never see. Neither man realized that the brief conversation they had shared outside a federal building had permanently shaped the way each of them viewed public service. One carried a badge representing local law enforcement. The other carried credentials representing federal responsibility. Yet both ultimately discovered that the strongest foundation beneath every badge, every credential, and every oath was the same enduring principle. Fairness must always come before judgment, because public trust is earned one thoughtful decision at a time. As another season settled over Washington, District of Columbia, the quiet lessons born from one unexpected morning continued reaching people who had never witnessed the encounter themselves. Officer Ryan Collins had gradually become a trusted mentor for younger officers entering field training, not because he claimed to have all the answers, but because he openly acknowledged that the best decisions often began with the willingness to question personal assumptions. During one afternoon patrol, a rookie officer accompanying Ryan noticed a well-dressed man waiting outside a government building and quietly suggested that something seemed unusual. Ryan smiled gently before answering. "Observation is important," he said. "The next step is making certain our conclusions come from facts instead of first impressions." Together they approached the citizen with courtesy, introduced themselves, explained the purpose of the contact, and listened carefully before asking additional questions. Within moments, the conversation ended naturally, leaving everyone involved feeling respected rather than challenged. As they returned to the patrol vehicle, the rookie admitted that the encounter had unfolded far more smoothly than expected. Ryan replied with quiet honesty. "Professionalism is not measured by how quickly we reach conclusions. It is measured by how carefully we seek the truth." Across the city, Special Agent Marcus Reed continued serving with the same discipline that had defined his entire career. His assignments remained confidential, his schedule demanding, and his commitment unwavering. During a leadership seminar attended by federal investigators from several field offices, Marcus was invited to speak about cooperation between agencies. He never mentioned Officer Collins by name or described the details of their encounter. Instead, he focused on a broader principle. Trust between institutions, he explained, is strengthened when people remember that every badge represents responsibility before authority. The room fell thoughtfully quiet as experienced investigators recognized the wisdom carried within such simple words. David Sullivan later joined Marcus after the seminar concluded, commenting that partnerships with local agencies had become stronger because both sides increasingly emphasized communication over assumption. Marcus agreed. "Every respectful conversation prevents misunderstandings that reports alone can never repair," he answered. Meanwhile, Ryan's supervising lieutenant observed noticeable changes in the department's newest officers. They spent more time explaining procedures, answered citizens' questions with greater patience, and approached uncertain situations with steadier judgment. During a staff meeting, the lieutenant thanked Ryan for helping reinforce a culture centered on professionalism rather than pride. Ryan accepted the compliment modestly, understanding that the lesson had not originated with him. It had begun with one calm individual who had chosen dignity over confrontation during a moment when misunderstanding could easily have produced resentment. Several weeks later, representatives from local law enforcement and federal agencies gathered for a joint training exercise focused on public communication and interagency coordination. Ryan and Marcus unexpectedly found themselves participating in the same discussion group. Their greeting required nothing more than a firm handshake and genuine smiles. There was no lingering tension, only mutual respect earned through reflection and growth. As the session concluded, participants left with a renewed appreciation for the quiet partnerships protecting communities every day. Ryan watched Marcus leave the conference center surrounded not by attention but by ordinary routine, and he realized that genuine leadership often moved through the world without demanding recognition. Some people inspired change by speaking loudly. Others changed lives simply by remaining calm when every reason existed to do otherwise. That understanding stayed with Ryan long after the day ended. reminding him that every future encounter offered another opportunity to strengthen public confidence through fairness, humility, and thoughtful judgment. Months after the encounter that neither man could have predicted, the quiet influence of that morning continued spreading through institutions built upon public trust. Washington, District of Columbia moved through another busy season as government buildings welcomed thousands of employees, attorneys, investigators, and citizens each day. Few people passing along those familiar sidewalks knew that a simple conversation had gradually become an example discussed in training rooms rather than headlines. Officer Ryan Collins had earned growing respect among fellow officers because of the consistency with which he approached every assignment. The greatest change was not visible in his uniform or reflected in any commendation. It appeared in the way he listened before speaking, observed before concluding, and explained every professional decision with patience rather than assumption. During one community outreach event hosted by local law enforcement and several federal agencies, Ryan volunteered to answer questions from high school students interested in careers in public service. One student asked what lesson had shaped his career more than any academy training. Ryan paused before answering with complete honesty. "Every person standing in front of you deserves to be understood before they are judged," he said. That principle protects both the public and the officer. The students quietly nodded, recognizing that his answer came from experience instead of memorized instruction. Across the auditorium, Special Agent Marcus Reed listened without interrupting while participating in another discussion panel focused on cooperation between federal investigators and local departments. When his turn arrived, he expanded upon the same idea from a different perspective. "Professional relationships are built long before major investigations begin," he explained. "They begin during ordinary conversations where respect creates confidence, and confidence creates effective partnerships." His remarks received thoughtful applause because they reflected years of practical service rather than abstract theory. After the event concluded, Marcus and Ryan crossed paths near the entrance of the Civic Center. Their greeting required only a handshake and genuine smiles. Neither spoke about the misunderstanding that had first introduced them. Instead, they discussed the students who had attended the program and the importance of encouraging future public servants to value integrity above recognition. David Sullivan joined them moments later, commenting that cooperative training programs had significantly improved communication between agencies over the past year. Ryan agreed, observing that officers increasingly recognize the value of slowing down long enough to understand the complete picture before acting. Marcus responded quietly, "Every institution becomes stronger when learning is treated as progress instead of embarrassment." As the afternoon sun settled across the city skyline, the three men stepped outside and watched families, tourists, government employees, and visitors move peacefully through the nation's capital. Each represented a different profession, yet each carried the same responsibility to protect public confidence through professionalism and fairness. Before leaving, Marcus looked toward Ryan and offered one final observation. "People rarely remember every word spoken during an encounter," he said. "They remember how they were treated." Ryan reflected on that sentence long after they walked in different directions. He realized that genuine authority was never measured by how much power someone possessed. It was measured by the wisdom to exercise that power with restraint, the humility to recognize opportunities for growth, and the discipline to place fairness ahead of assumption every single time. That understanding had quietly transformed an ordinary patrol officer into a better public servant, while reminding everyone involved that the strongest partnerships are built not through perfect moments, but through the willingness to learn from imperfect ones. 1 year after an ordinary morning unexpectedly connected two public servants from different institutions, Washington, District of Columbia continued moving with the steady rhythm that had always defined the nation's capital. Office lights illuminated government buildings before sunrise, commuters filled the sidewalks with purpose, and thousands of decisions affecting countless lives quietly unfolded behind courthouse doors, police precincts, and federal offices. Few people remembered the brief encounter outside the federal building because it had never become a public spectacle. There had been no dramatic headlines, no unnecessary confrontation, and no attempt by anyone involved to seek attention. Instead, its lasting influence survived through something far more meaningful. It lived inside the choices made afterward. Officer Ryan Collins now carried himself with a calm confidence, shaped by experience rather than assumption. Every new officer assigned to work beside him quickly discovered that his first lesson had nothing to do with equipment or procedure. He always began with the same simple reminder. Every person you meet deserves the chance to be understood before being judged. Those words gradually became part of the department's culture because younger officers witnessed how respect often resolved uncertainty long before conflict could ever begin. Across the city, Special Agent Marcus Reed continued serving with the quiet professionalism that had defined his entire career. His assignments remained confidential, his accomplishments largely unseen, and his commitment to the Constitution unchanged. During a leadership conference attended by representatives from federal agencies, local law enforcement, and judicial organizations, Marcus was invited to deliver closing remarks about public service. Looking across the audience, he recognized familiar faces, including Officer Collins seated several rows from the front. Marcus smiled briefly before speaking. "Public trust is not built during extraordinary moments alone," he said. "It is built through ordinary decisions repeated every day with integrity, humility, and fairness." The room became completely silent as every listener reflected upon those words. They understood that lasting confidence in public institutions depended less upon authority than upon the character of the people entrusted to exercise it. After the conference concluded, Marcus and Ryan walked together toward the building entrance beneath the clear afternoon sky. There were no cameras waiting outside, no reporters asking questions, and no crowd expecting a dramatic ending. They simply spoke as professionals who had both grown because one unexpected conversation had challenged them to become better versions of themselves. Ryan thanked Marcus once again for the patience he had shown that morning many months earlier. Marcus answered with the same quiet sincerity that had never changed. "We all carry responsibilities," he said. "The important question is whether we allow those responsibilities to make us wiser." They shook hands before continuing in different directions, each returning to the work awaiting them. Ryan climbed into his patrol vehicle and prepared for another ordinary shift serving his community. Marcus entered an unmarked federal vehicle and reviewed the next assignment waiting on his schedule. The city continued exactly as it always had, yet both men understood that something lasting had changed. One had learned that assumptions could never replace careful judgment. The other had demonstrated that dignity remained strongest when protected by patience instead of pride. And somewhere between a local badge and a federal credential, they had both discovered the same enduring truth. Real authority is never proven by the power someone possesses. It is revealed by the wisdom to use that power with restraint, the humility to learn from every experience, and the unwavering commitment to treat every person with fairness before reaching any conclusion. Because when respect leads the way, justice no longer becomes merely an outcome. It becomes the path itself.